Welcome. Before we get started on this interview with Robert Klein and Christine Schmidt, I want to note that we assume that the viewers watching this are enrolled in or have taken at least one graduate level course on group psychotherapy. These courses offer an introduction to group development, basic theories, and an overview of the types of groups typically run, but rarely have time to dive into a specific type of group. Thus, it's my pleasure to focus this on the third part of our series on support groups. Let me introduce our two guests today. Robert Klein is a licensed psychologist and a certified psychodramatist. He has published in the proceedings of numerous drug and alcohol abuse conferences. He is also taught at the Community College of Philadelphia and is certified to teach various courses for the National Institute for Drug Abuse. He is a certified trainer for the Office of Drug and Alcohol Programs of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. He is one of the co-founders and now a partner emeritus in GKSW Crystal Group Associates. His clinical work includes individuals, couples, group, and family counseling, as well as training and organizational development. He has provided training and consultation services to interpersonal groups such as the US Peace Corps and has worked in the private sector and for public health organizations. He provides training and consultation in clinical, administrative, and management skills to a large number of drug and alcohol rehabilitation facilities. He serves on advisory boards to hospitals, schools, and healthcare agencies. Welcome, Robert. It's good to have you here.
Good to be here.
Next, I'd like to introduce Christine Schmidt, who is a 66-year-old white-identified cisgender female psychotherapist in Brooklyn, New York. She provides combined group and individual psychotherapy that is informed by a social justice perspective. She brings her awareness of whiteness to her daily life, work as a group psychotherapist, and as an organizational change maker. As a racial literacy consultant in education and mental health, she is committed to helping clients and organizations deepen their commitment to undoing white racism and historical arrangements of power. Christine has published articles about race in psychoanalytic and group journals and has contributed to books on these subjects. She co-chairs the work group for racial equity of the Eastern Group Psychotherapy Society. In addition to her psychotherapy practice, she leads whiteness learning groups and racial literacy groups and volunteers with New York State's coping circles to help support citizens during the COVID-19 pandemic. She is active in many professional psychoanalytic, group psychotherapy, and mediation associations. Christine has 3 adult sons. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure to have both of you here with us today. To get us started, can each of you please tell us about the support groups you are currently running and what you found to be powerful about these types of groups?
Okay, so I would like to speak about the Coping Circles initiative mentioned in your introduction, Leanne. It is a response in New York State to make psychotherapy-led support groups available to absolutely any citizen resident in the state who requests one, which is an amazing audacious initiative to provide support groups to everyone in New York State. I applied, submitted an application that was vetted, actually went through a number of hours of training, and so that was something that the state wanted to have fairly consistent. And then I sat back and waited. These were short-term therapy groups. I'm still active and I'm sitting back and waiting for another assignment. So I've done a few groups, but I'm in kind of an interim. And it has been a really wonderful experience to be available, to provide a service as a volunteer to people throughout the state, because these have been on Zoom. The diverse geographies. I've had people who are urban citizens here in the Bronx, people who are in the suburbs in Long Island, people who are in upstate communities. And there's been an excitement for me as the group leader to have this kind of geographical and life experience diversity, but also this tremendous support and commonality that drew people to be in, often their very first experience in any kind of psychological support group, not a therapy group, but any kind of psychological support group. And so, uh, and that's always very exciting for me to have the experience with people who would never come near anybody who says, oh, I'm a therapist or I do therapy. And yet to find that this would be something that they really enjoyed and looked forward to week after week after week after week. So that's what I'm currently doing. I'll speak about another community COVID-related support group that I did, but I want to hear a little bit from Robert too.
Thank you. Assuming you can hear me okay, I'm doing 2 groups right now that are actually outgrowths of my regular therapy group. I don't think it's realistic in my experience to think I can really do group therapy online with Zoom or any other one because of the inability to see all the body movements to get the immediacy of what's going on in the interaction, both on a group level and on an individual level. And so what I did was in each of the 2 therapy groups, one is a young men's group, guys between 21 and let's say 45, who were in therapy with me. Now we just meet once a week for an hour. I've decided not to charge them because I'm not doing therapy. I can be kind enough during COVID to not have to make money on everything I do. And it's really a check-in, but it starts to get more serious as people check in about what's going on in their life, in their lives, and what has been going on. And the guys in the group are very supportive of each other. The other group is a mixed therapy group, men and women, most between the ages of, I'd say, 35 to 40 to 65, 75. And again, the same thing. And they're very supportive of each other. I don't tease out things in these groups. I think that's what's different about a support group as opposed to an ongoing psychotherapy group. I don't want to stimulate. I want to acknowledge, give room, help people to talk about and encourage, and they do it anyway because they know each other, to support and help each other. Many times they tell me to be quiet, they're talking, which I totally respect them for because that sounds very good to me. And I had previously done an adolescent group. And in thinking about it, I called it a therapy group, but it was really a support group because, again, I wasn't wanting to stimulate. I wanted to help the adolescents begin to identify what they were experiencing and be able to talk about it without fear of having to move into something and reveal any more than they wanted to at any given time. And we had pizza several times a session.
Yeah, food in a group definitely does not make it a therapy group then.
Exactly, but sometimes, not everything that's therapeutic is helpful, and many things that don't seem helpful are therapeutic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Robert, I'm really interested in knowing more about the mixed men's group that the
young men's group? The young men's group or the mixed group?
Oh, the first one you described, that was the
young men's group.
Young men's group, because it sounded like you said these were some former patients. And so was that something that you began as a response to the isolation from COVID?
That sounds great. I wish it were true.
Okay. I want to know where it came from.
Oh, I'll be glad to tell you, but that would be a great, what we call functional lie. That would work. No, I suddenly was treating about 6 or 8 young men who all seemed to be dealing with issues around fathers, issues around separating from home, issues around career, issues around relationship. And I thought to myself, you know what, why not do a group, And so I said, you guys, I didn't do it together, but each one, I said, you interested in the group? And almost all of them said, yeah, it's cheaper too. I said, great, And so I started this group on Tuesday nights, a 2-hour group. The only reason I do a 2-hour group is that's what I did in 1970 when I started doing group therapy. And it seems like the right amount of time, but there really isn't any right amount of time. Some people do group for an hour, some people do an hour and a half. If you remember marathons, I used to run marathons.
Oh, no.
Oh yeah, yeah, in the days of encounter groups.
Right.
Yeah, that's not a
You're
race.
dating yourself, Robert. Okay.
Excuse me?
You're dating yourself.
I know. I'm what we call a dinosaur. Okay? I probably should be put out to pasture at this point.
Well, I'm sort of dinosaurish too, and that's why I put my age in the.
I'm 70.
So you got a couple on me, but when COVID started to urge people to socially distance, I won't call isolate, I hate that word isolate, but social distance. And and given my demographics, I thought, you know what, I'm one of those. I'm going to sit in front of my computer, and what can I do? So I did reach out to many. I sent a BCC mass email to all of my current and former patients and said, hey, I'm going to be doing twice a week some support groups. And if you're interested, it was kind of a drop-in group idea. Every Monday and every Thursday, I think those were the 2 days I did them. And I said, let me know and I'll send you something. And it was very upbeat and resilient. And I'd say, let's talk about some of the things that are helping us stay connected, some of the pleasures in your life, some of the sadness that may bump into it. And so it started that way with these twice a week drop-in support groups that I would offer on Zoom, and I'd send a link out to anybody who wanted. And then I thought, because it's not a therapy group, I live in an apartment building with 180 units, and I thought, let me see if there are neighbors who want to come in. And then one of my neighbors said, there's this mutual aid group in the community. And I thought, wow, I love the mutual aid groups that are out there helping people get groceries and deliveries, and they have a website, so I posted it there. So up until I began doing the coping circles group, I had my own little kind of drop-in support group, anybody who wanted to come, and I had a number of people who were regular and would come every Monday or every Thursday, a few people who would come every Monday and every Thursday, a few people who would, so I never quite knew who would be in the group, and sometimes I had people who knew people who came to the group whom I hadn't met, but it was for me, such an exciting opportunity to just offer a container and help people talk to each other about what's it like? What is it like? And that was I did that for March, April, May, and into the beginning of June. And then June is when the coping circles picked up. But it was so wonderful when New York was in such a place of terror and fear, and people were so either voluntarily locked in or really were because they were ill and diagnosed. It was such a terrifying time to do that. So that part of my experience was also what made me really curious about, so how did you get these young men together, and did they keep coming? And
they've been coming for, it's going on 3 years now.
Wow.
Some the whole time, some are new. It's fascinating. I think, I was listening to you and I was really intrigued by what you said, especially about people coming in who were neighbors and other people, which I think between you and I and anybody else that cares to listen, I think is wonderful. It's an anathema to the analytic community, but I think it's a really good thing. And I think I mean, I do Gestalt therapy. I'm a certified psychodramatist, though in honesty, it's on hold now. I got tired of paying dues, and I'm not doing psychodrama as a consultant anymore. So I put the membership on hold. But I think all the therapy we do, and you may or may not agree with me about this, it's always ultimately to get to an honest conversation.
Yes.
Can we have an honest conversation?
With another person.
Yeah. By
Right?
myself.
Connection.
Yeah. But I would never have one with myself. I don't want to know all of me.
No.
But with others, I mean, that's really I think the goal. And so what you're doing, which I'm so impressed with, is being able to have people in where you can have that honest conversation, acknowledge you're a neighbor. I've
Yes.
never found anything in group we couldn't talk about. I had somebody in regular therapy group once who dissociated. She would dissociate in the middle of the group, and everybody was wonderful with it. We'd talk about it, they'd help her through it, and we'd go right on. You know, and it's our courage as a clinician. And that's where my greatest failing is, when I'm not courageous.
Yeah.
And actually say, hey, this is what I think is going on, or this is what I'm feeling, or this is what I'm seeing. And it also strikes me, I don't know if you have this experience, Christine, how many individual therapists are terrified of doing group?
Oh, absolutely.
I find that, sorry, mind-boggling.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think you do have to be nimble and playful in a group, because there are so many different dynamics going on. Playful. And I want to come back to that, because what liberates me as a group leader is that I know where I can get in and play. I love doing groups. And something I was thinking about when you were talking a moment ago, about knowing what the boundaries are that are important, and knowing what boundaries we can challenge and test. And so, you know, I was thinking of that when you remarked about opening this up to neighbors in my building. And I thought, I did have to go through, what would that mean for me as in my therapist identity to do that? And is that important at this time? Or is there a different way I could think of what healing and safety and comfort and honesty are like when I'm surrounded by people who are terrified?
Yes.
And it's like, yeah, I'm going to scratch at some of those. And I can maybe disclose a little bit more about myself in a support group, because people want to know, so who am I? What's my skin in the game?
Who is it? There was a guy named Sid Wolf who wrote an article on helping qualities years and years ago. I used to use it in training. And he said, we self-disclose when it will help the client move forward, not to meet our own needs, not to reduce our own anxiety, not to get pity, but we do it only when we think it will help the person move forward.
Right.
And that's, I mean, we have to be, I have to be careful with that. I think we all do. I've had clients tell me, would you shut up, Robert? I'm not interested in you.
Mm-hmm.
And outside of hurting my feelings, I think they're right. I mean, I think I've made every mistake you can make. And I think that's maybe what new therapists.
And the ones you didn't make, I've made, so.
Oh yeah, well, I've made some I won't even talk about out loud. They're too embarrassing. But, you know, I've done them all.
Yeah.
And my mistakes are what gives me the best material, because then my clients correct me or get mad at me or give me something to work with.
Right.
So I want people to make mistakes. When I'm training group therapists, I will sometimes say to them, you need to tape this, and I want to see you make at least 5 egregious mistakes. I'm sure you know, in training with people where they go, no, I can't do that. The group will explode. You'll see. They'll die. They'll kill themselves. How bad, you know? People forget our clients survived long before they met us.
Yes.
It's that powerful.
Well, and our neighbors and the people down the block, and and whoever they are. I did get a little bit of extra supervision last spring before I decided to do this very creative, just make myself available for drop-in support groups with Nancy Kelly in Santa Fe, who is like another amazing, amazing group leader. And she helped me formulate how I might think about group agreements as something very different for support groups as opposed to therapy groups. And that, I mean, it really helped me put into words and have a different kind of framework around confidentiality, for one. And what I offered people who came into my support group is, don't say anything in this group. Don't feel that you have to say or disclose anything that you aren't fairly comfortable saying in a somewhat public setting, because I am not going to, it's not a therapy group. I'm not going to ask people to hold confidentiality. I will respect, and I'm not going to record or say anything that I've heard, but I'm not going to ask for everybody to agree to that. So we're going to be friendly, but I'm not going to ask you to say everything that comes to your mind. So, and that was a big difference.
Here's a problem that I had and lost a client because of it. And it's really interesting. And as a sidelight, one of the things when we have our staff meetings, I'm part of a group practice. When somebody presents a case, what we all do is talk about where we get stuck instead of giving advice or telling anybody what to do. It makes it safe for people to share. But in any case, this, and that's really a support group. That's why I brought that up, that staff meeting. So one of the people in the group, a woman who has an adult son who was really struggling and had gotten in trouble at college doing, kids are stupid, okay? It's not personal. They're just dumb. It's not their fault. I was dumb as a kid. If you've ever seen a movie where someone breaks a bottle over somebody's head in the movies, they're made out of spun sugar. They're not real. But this kid hit a kid over the head with a champagne bottle. Needless to say, he broke his orbital bone in his eye. Okay, the kid's fine. They're friends. They were classmates, but whatever. And during the whole business with this racism and what's been happening recently, one of the guys was saying that, it's really ridiculous that some people get away with that because they're white. Whereas if we're an African-American kid or a Hispanic kid or whatever, they may well have ended up in jail. And they got into an argument online through Facebook. Now, that's not something I could have prevented.
Right.
It's stupid, but that happened. This woman, the mother of the son's brother, recognized it was his nephew. So this other guy had broken confidentiality by putting enough out there so that the kid could be identified. They had a huge fighting group, and he left.
Yeah.
One of the longest running members of the group. He was getting ready to leave, but that was not.
Right.
I probably should have said, stay the hell off Facebook. But
the toxicity of social media, the disruptiveness.
Yeah.
It's.
And I called him and I talked to the guy, and everybody wants him to come back. He's too embarrassed. It's almost like, I assume you've had this, somebody comes into a regular therapy group, shares too much in the first session, and then can't come back. And the group doesn't want him back because they expected to share that much.
Right. And so I really do think it's important in a support. Well, let me think about this now. Yeah. I would love you to weigh in on it. I was about to say, in a support group, I want to not promise confidentiality, but I'm thinking maybe it was the more drop-in nature of the group where people didn't know if they were going to see the same people the following week or the following week. And there was something about that was both magical and exciting because you never knew, but it was also
threatening.
Yeah, there was something threatening about it. And that's why I, at the beginning of every group, even if it was the same people, it was kind of my ritual to go over how we came together, what we were going to do, what we were not going to do, and what I was able to provide in terms of, you talk about what's on your mind, talk about what it's been like for you this week, what helped you, what frightened you.
That's great. I mean, I struggle with that sometimes, because on one hand, I don't want to set every norm for the group. The one thing I learned when I was working in drug and alcohol, and I worked in the therapeutic community back in the early 70s, when I still had hair. It was a long time ago. Okay. I had a lot of hair, but it was a very long time ago.
Now it's here.
Yeah, it's all I have left now, right? You got it, Christine. You scoped me out.
Right.
But there were only two rules in the whole community: no violence or threats of violence,
Right.
no drug and alcohol on grounds. Everything else we could discuss.
Yeah.
The closest a hospital that I had been a part of had ever been to a real therapeutic community. And it was a wonderful experience. I learned so much. I used to do group, and I had video cameras. I had 3 cameras, and two were remote and somebody working them when I was doing training there. It was wonderful. But we could talk about everything. And so, I mean, I go through the rules of the group whenever somebody new comes in, but everything else we can discuss. We got to figure out how to deal with this, which in some ways almost makes it like a work group. I was thinking, who was the social worker? Slavson, who worked with kids and did these work groups with these kids who were in orphanages and in daycare. Am I remembering correctly? Something like that. But he used that process to look.
Yeah.
And I think we forget we can do things. We try.
Yeah, no, I really like that. 2 group rules or norms, right?
Yeah, that's it. Everything else we can discuss.
Right. And I started out with the idea of having no interrupting, but it very quickly morphed into.
You're in the northeast section of the city. How can you, or the country? How can you not interrupt?
Because I'm from Iowa, even though I live in Brooklyn.
You're middle class and Jewish. All you do is interrupt, like I'm doing right now.
Yeah, I'll say, okay.
Sorry, I apologize.
But what my idea of no interrupting morphed into was, we want to make a space so that everybody who wants to talk can talk. We just want to be aware that there's a space for everybody's voice to come in if they want to. And that made it a lot gentler than this no interrupting, which is where I had started. And it took me maybe 2 of these drop-in support group sessions before I realized that they'll get it. And then the second rule was, we're not going to have this confidentiality thing, so just talk about what you're comfortable. And the third one was, is there anything else that you all want to bring up that we should talk about? So it really, and sometimes they'd come up with an idea, sometimes they wouldn't.
Yeah, I often trick new clients when they come into therapy by saying you don't have to share anything you don't want to share.
Right.
Which is what they have anyway. I'm not giving them anything they don't have.
Yeah, except that you're amplifying it back to them. And it's something that's very comforting. It's like, oh, okay, so I'm in the right place.
Right, except part of the goal, hopefully the goal of therapy is they realize they don't need that from me. That is their choice, and they should tell me when to not ask them.
Right.
It's so hard to get people to, and why would I expect people to feel safe in the beginning?
Right.
Yeah, but I like your idea about the modeling of not cutting people off. And, and setting the norm by saying, excuse me, I'm not sure so-and-so finished what they were saying. And again, I'll use humor a lot. I'll say, listen, I have this fetish about unfinished sentences. I'm really curious about the end.
Right. And then everyone laughs. And
Right, and then they finish it. And then we model the norm, and it starts to get going.
see that about you. I know you like to play. Maybe
Oh, I
that's
love to
like
play.
a job of
I don't even know why they pay me for therapy. I still don't understand that.
I love it. I love it.
I have too much fun.
Yeah, no, it really is. It really is. I learn so much from people who come into these support groups too. It's pretty phenomenal getting I don't know, stories about how people kept on coping, what they did to get up and go into work every day, what fed them, and I'd have these little kind of files in the back of my head where I go, wow, I'm going to remember that. I'm going to try that one on.
Sometimes I feel guilty. Do you ever feel guilty? Sometimes I feel guilty because I don't have to leave my house. I can do all the work from here. And I've got clients who have to go into the office or go to do something. And I start thinking like, well, why should I be allowed to do this? If I was any kind of person, I'd be putting myself in harm's way, doing stuff. And yet I'm such a wuss. I'm not.
Oh, it's so true. I had somebody person in one of my groups who worked in foster care.
Mm-hmm.
And as we have read about so widely with the rise of domestic violence during the pandemic, where people were so confined and isolated, and they had lost a number of people in their own immediate family, and so we're struggling with loss, the terror of going out there, but having to make home visits because you can't do foster care and domestic violence investigation on Zoom or on the phone. And so it was just, and exactly what you're saying there. I would sit in the comfort of sitting in front of my computer and having this opportunity to try and offer support to somebody who was so traumatized, and going out there and doing just incredibly important frontline work, and from that place of isolation too. So yeah, I would be able to look at myself that way too. It's like, wow, I am so lucky that I could do this.
Yeah, I think many times we don't appreciate it. At least for me, I don't appreciate my luck.
Yeah.
The stuff I've either gotten away with growing up, or even get away with now by not having to put myself in
Right.
that position. Should I be in a hospital helping people who are caretakers or patients?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was there a point in these last months where you felt like you had just reached your limit to how much you could put out?
It's interesting. I've never felt burnt out. I think because I play. I think that's the reason. But who knows? Tomorrow I'll probably feel burnt out. But what I have felt is exhausted from Zoom.
Yeah.
Literally about to fall asleep as someone's talking, because Zoom fatigue is so real.
That's right.
And I'm aware that I'm drinking coffee. I've got to drink now to keep myself functional, so I do something. And it's so weird.
Yeah. I totally am with you there. I am hungry to get back into physical space where I could meet with groups. Not so much individual people. I think I'm more interested in meeting with groups. So I hate Zoom. I hate the grid. I want to see a circle. I want to smell people. I want to like have all of those sensations.
Yeah.
And yet, this opportunity to be with people from rural upstate communities, suburban Long Island, South Bronx.
You've got the whole
all in one circle or one grid, right? It's not a circle, it's a grid, right? And so it's like, I was willing to give up the circle in person in order to have a grid that would let me offer something that I couldn't do otherwise. I don't know how else I'd do it.
Well, I think you're saying something very special, Christine, at least as I think about it. We think about and plan in terms of what's the best. We do what we can do given the situation, full well knowing we'll never get the best of all possible worlds. Not that, but I mean, I can talk when when I do training in drug and alcohol group of therapists and about group therapy. I can talk to them about, and they go, yeah, but I have 7 things else to do, and we're not allowed to do that, and we can't do this, and our video camera or whatever else, you know.
Right. So yeah, so you do make do with what you have. And
Yeah, I think you're doing, I really, well, I applaud you for what you're doing. I think you're amazing.
well, thank you. I'm loving it. I'm loving it.
Yeah, you should. You're really terrific.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to jump in here now. My internet connection's getting unstable, so I don't want to keep this going and lose the wonderful things that you're both saying. So I'm going to work to wrap this up with one final question here. I certainly appreciate everything that you've shared so far, but if you could offer any words of wisdom to students watching this, students going to school in the midst of these pandemics, of the focus on Black Lives Matters movement, thinking about moving into running support groups when they graduate or co-leading them, what recommendations would you give them?
You know, Robert, you said something that I'm really sitting with, that maybe it's your wisdom, but I'm holding on to it, so I have part of it. And that is the kind of centering our reason for doing this in honesty and having honest conversations and honest connections. And it's almost like if that is the soul and main drive that you come into, I love the way you brought that in, and I thought, yeah, that would be if I could pick one advice, it would be to hold on to honesty and truth, which is not easy, but it's an aspiration.
Right.
Definitely the aspiration.
I really don't have to add anything to that. I mean, that is what I believe. I mean, I'll just over talk it, so let me shut up. I totally support that 100%. Not only because I said it, but because the way you said it is so real. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And to both of you for this honest conversation. Certainly on behalf of Division 49 and the Society of Group Psychology, Group Psychotherapy, we certainly want to extend our deep thanks. This has been wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Have a great weekend.
Okay.
Take care.